Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to paint white fur in acrylics. Now the first thing that I like to focus on is the base foundation. This is the case with any fur colour that I'm painting, but with white fur we do want to be making sure that we've got this right. The first thing is to start to capture the darker values in between those lighter highlights. Now the one thing that's really important when painting white fur is that it's not actually white. White is very reflective, so there's going to be other colours from the environment, maybe bounce light. If there's a photograph of an animal that's inside, you could have potentially colours from the decor from inside the house, or alternatively outside, potentially greens from the grass and so on. So this is something that I want to be making sure to capture. Now this section here on the left hand side is a prime example. There was more of a warmer browner tone, which was actually the colour that was being reflected down from the fur on the face. So I wanted to make sure that I captured that. Now this is going to help build up a huge amount of depth as we continue to layer. Now the only exception with adding colours like that, if I was doing a pet portrait and it was a head and shoulder view and there was green being reflected up maybe on the bottom of the chin for example, but I wasn't adding any of that green and the grass in, I would actually leave that out of my painting and replicate that with more of a natural fur colour for that animal. But if you are including any of the green grass in that instance, then it would be okay to add that green reflection in the fur. Now my second biggest tip when painting white fur is the values. We don't want to just go in with bright white, we need to be making sure that we've got a slightly darker base layer so that those lighter highlights with our detailed brushes can show up. Now as I continue to work with my second layer for the base foundation, you can see that I'm also now focusing on getting a blended layer. I find that this is much easier for capturing more of those natural softer details, which is perfect for this kind of fur texture. Now I'm also moving my brush following the direction of the fur. This helps for us to follow that reference photo more accurately as we continue to layer. Now at the moment for this layer I'm doing a lot of a wet on wet blending technique method to get the softness. This is a technique that works really well when blending acrylics. Now because acrylics do dry fast, the blending of those layers can be trickier, and it's one of the questions that I'm asked more frequently. This is therefore something that I do cover thoroughly in the real-time tutorials on Patreon. I want to be making sure that I'm blending to the right degree to make sure that I don't overblend because that's going to be too soft, but I want to get that balance right to make sure that I do avoid those harsh start and stop points. So if you would like to see more on blending acrylics and all aspects involved with painting realistic fur, then I will link my Patreon in the description below. Now these little hairs on the edge of the subject, I think these are really important because it prevents that animal from looking like a sticker that's just been cut out and stuck on top of the background. I like to give this the right amount of time, like with all of the layers, to make sure that it's captured correctly. Now something that's really important when painting realistic fur in acrylics is the layering process and the number of layers that we apply. If I work with one or two layers, I'm going to end up with a very flat two-dimensional painting. You can see here that there are many layers that I'm adding before I even get to my brightest highlights. I want to be focusing on those midtones just as much as the lights and the darks. Now I do believe that the midtones make a huge difference to the amount of depth that is captured. So if an area of the painting is lacking, it might potentially be that there's not enough layers in place in that area. The number of layers is therefore going to influence how soft or how realistic that one area looks. Without the right number of layers, the contrast will be lacking because we don't have those number of values in that we should have. The lights, darks and midtones are all just as important as each other. They really do help to bring that higher level of realism to the painting when they're all incorporated correctly. Now I've got a video here on YouTube. It's my top tips for painting realistic fur in acrylics. I'll link that in the description below if it's of interest. But one of the things that I focus on there is brush technique. Now in order to create a variation in brush strokes, we need to be using the brushes in a different way from one section to the next. So longer fur on the top of the guinea pig's neck there compared to the face where it's shorter would require maybe a different brush or a different brush technique. I want to be making sure that I am changing that depending on the variation of that fur. So something here that makes a big difference is the amount of pressure that's applied to a brush. Now the brush that I'm going to be using here for the first proper layer of detail is a liner brush. Now in order to use a liner brush correctly, the paint versus water consistency is really important. If you're trying to create these longer lines like I am here and you're getting start and stop points, that's an indication that your mixture is too thick. You might need to add a little bit more water to get that to flow off your brush more easily. Now, something else that's important when using a brush like this is how thick your brush strokes are. Now, this is determined by a couple of different factors. How much paint you have on your brush can be one of those, and the other is the pressure that's applied. The more pressure you apply to the brush, this goes with any brush, the thicker your line is going to be. Now, typically when we use a liner or a rigger brush, we want those lines to be thinner, so we want to ease off of that pressure when we use this brush. The way that we're moving the brush and even holding the brush is also going to influence that. Now, how to create these fine details is something that I'm asked more frequently, so it is therefore an aspect that I cover all of my real-time step-by-step tutorials on thoroughly. I like to make sure that I've covered all of the techniques that are required for using a brush like this for these fine, delicate details. It really does make a difference to how realistic that fur is going to look. Now, we've briefly spoken about the pressure on the brush and how that can influence the brush strokes, but the fur direction is also just as important. This guinea pig painting was a great one for practicing how to use the brush and how to move the brush, because the fur direction, as you can see from the painting in the corner, it goes in many different directions. Now, the fur direction is not random, it will always follow the underlying bone and muscular structure. Now, when you're working on an animal where the coat is a little longer, like this guinea pig, there is going to be a bit more freedom of movement for that fur to be directed. Shorter coated animals, it's more obvious that it's following that structure under the skin. But even animals like this with that longer coat, you can really see that it follows, for example, over the shoulder, where the neck comes across down to the bottom of the chest. All of these main key fur directional changes are not random, and they do help to build up that realistic three-dimensional shape of that animal. Now, something else that works alongside that is the placement of the highlights and shadows. Now, what I mean by that is, for example, on the lower part of this section that I'm currently working on, it's significantly darker than in the middle. That's going to help make it give the impression that it curves over around the front leg and down towards the center part of the chest. If I was to have that area lighter and it didn't have as much of those darker values, I'm going to make it look more two-dimensional. It wouldn't have that three-dimensional rounded shape that I'm going for. So this is why the placement of those lights and darks is so important, as well as that fur direction. They both really do go hand in hand. Now, if that darker section was higher up, I'm going to therefore make it look like the neck and chest area curve around earlier, which means we're going to then lift up the placement of the shoulder. All of this has a knock-on effect. The neck then looks higher. It therefore makes it look like the neck is not the right shape. The head would therefore potentially look a little bit smaller. So it really does have an influence from everything else. So it's something that I really do want to make sure I get right, which is why at that base layer stage, I like to map in the lights and the darks first, because I therefore know I'm more likely to get that painting accurate right from the very first stage. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to my channel. And I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you are interested in painting along to the real-time tutorial of this guinea pig or any of my other step-by-step lessons, then I'll link my Patreon in the description below. And if you have any art-related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments, because I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video at the end of the week, but as always, thank you so much for watching.